Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural fantasy and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The In-Between. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. In this particular case, in this episode, it's involving a serial killer. In particular, this serial killer is going after newlyweds, torturing and killing the husbands, but then also drowning the wives. So now it kind of creates this profile of like, okay, so if it was just about, being jilted by maybe a woman or something, the killer would just kill the women because they're with the women so long waiting for the husband to come back. So, but the fact is, it's meant to be a symbolization of like, oh, look at what like it's happening to your significant other is what this whole situation is, and so like obviously the investigation goes in many different ways. For one, like the newest couple ends up being a couple where the husband kind of got free and tried to call police, but that kind of puts a wrench in the killer's plan, and the killer wasn't able to kind of clean up like they wanted to. Like, for example, there ends up being a pink carnation left behind, and, so that kind of leans a lot of stuff. For one, like, pink carnations kind of represent a woman's love. There's a whole conversation of like, well, most women kind of don't like them, do they? So it turns into this whole, that's kind of like beside the point, but then it turns into the whole like, okay, so is it this person? Because it turns out the latest victim, she was having an affair. Was it him? It turns out it wasn't him. In fact, the woman he was having the affair with, she thought it was him sending the flowers. So basically these people get flowers ahead of time, but it also seems like later on stuff in the investigation makes it seem like, oh no, flowers are the pink carnations are brought to the scene and then they are taken away by the killer. So that's an interesting thing. It's part of this whole thing. Well, obviously there's a center, a group that's put together at a center where basically newlyweds kind of come to kind of vent, because obviously their worries and concern, like obviously like, marriage not being what they thought it was, kind of it being a lot more difficult than they thought it would be. Well, it turns out in the long run that the lady running that group, Lila, turns out to be the killer. That was an interesting twist. It's actually kind of sad when you break down her story, because basically it's like, oh, her fiance dumps her on their wedding day, and then later on is like the coordinator that she was working with for her wedding, her husband Ashley ended up eloping like 8 months later, and afterwards she kind of had a psychotic break. And that's what this is. Every time she's hurting people, these couples, she's hurting like the woman that stole her husband away, but also torturing her husband, because in her mind she kept thinking like the reason why she never went after him directly was because like, oh, given enough time he'll come back to me. In her twisted mind, that's kind of what she thought. And, at the end of the day, she's like, she's torturing the wives. One of the questions she's asking is like, given the chance, all that's happened and stuff like that, would you do it all over again? And they say, I do. And that kind of pisses her off and stuff like that, because she was a very just disturbed person in the grand scheme of things. It's kind of crazy when you look at just the grand scheme of everything, especially like when you first got introduced to her. She seems so calm, cool, she wants to help people. But then when you see her like in that final showdown, it's like, she's crazy, dude. It's interesting because even like Tom is like, dude, you really, because she's like, oh, I put this group together. I didn't think anyone was going to be there. But it's like, oh, she had a plethora of people showing up, and it's like, jeez. That's also like why she specifically picked a certain day that she did, was because it was about picking the day that her wedding was called off. So once again, she was, serial killers usually kind of have their triggers, and it ended up being her. She literally surrounded, because for her it's like the whole thing of who wouldn't want to be married, and I guess for her it set her off because all these women have their issues with their marriages. It's like, how dare you have any issues? At least you got married, like that. Just hearing them probably vent about their problems probably just pissed her off even more, and probably like the more pissed off she got about the reason why she probably specifically chose the targets that she did. So that's a very complicated thing. At the very least, when it's all said and done, she was locked up and everything. So luckily they were able to save the wife and the husband. What's interesting is obviously when it's all said and done, Damien's kind of blaming himself, because it's like, I kind of assumed that the killer was a male, and that could have caused the investigation to kind of go down a different route for months, kind of going to no end, and we would have had another victims on our hand. And the thing is, I guess, because, in his defense, I guess it's like the whole thing of like, statistically speaking, I think the whole thing is like most serial killers are men. But, obviously, like, but, Cassie kind of tells him, is like, you and me are kind of a lot of, like, we're giving a whole bunch of information, and it's up to us to kind of decipher it, and then we have to kind of make it fit the puzzle. It's like, all we can do is do our best, kind of make him feel better, make him see that it's not just kind of like, no matter what happens, as long as you're trying your best, that's kind of what matters the most. And it is interesting to make the parallels because she does kind of get cryptic messages that she does ultimately have to decipher. Like, for example, the whole message for Ashley, how that came to her. She got cuts on her faces and, like, Ashley got splattered in blood. I think that probably should have been a key sign that Ashley was a guy, because what happened to the guys? They get messed up. Well, in this particular case, well, she slashed up all the guys, didn't she? Or at the very least, Ashley at the end was. So, but, they jumped to the conclusion thinking, but also that was pretty brutal, just like the cuts on her face and then just the blood splattering on the glass spilling out on Ashley. Obviously, she's drowning. Like, I think that was kind of symbolizing, like, obviously, like, oh, the cuts from what she would do to a guy, and obviously beforehand she had the drownings that would happen to a woman. So, but obviously, once again, you fit together the pieces, because even that's not something I even thought about until I look back on everything in retrospect to be like, oh yeah, that was kind of a key sign that Ashley was actually a guy. But nevertheless, so there's that side of things. Another side of this episode is Cassie meeting up with one of her best friends from high school, Melinda. Well, Melinda kind of was one of those people that Cassie kind of put at a distance. Basically, her and a whole bunch of other girls and Cassie kind of did like a Ouija board thing and ended up summoning this spirit of a guy named Craig who ended up dying apparently from an aneurysm. Well, Cassie saw him and it freaked. I wonder, was that her earliest example situation of the whole ghost thing? Was that like because after that, like, Cassie stood away just because she pushed people away, because like going through what she was going through, she already felt like a weirdo, and telling people probably the truth would have probably just caused her more grief, so she was just like, I'll keep it to myself. Like, that was just her way of dealing with things. And so I actually think that's kind of interesting, because I think that plays a role in a lot of stuff that is, about Cassie, in the sense that Cassie ends up talking about the fact is, back in the day, like, Craig, she would constantly see his spirit throughout the school, and obviously he'd be kind of holding onto his head. Like I said, I'll get to a lot of that stuff, but it was almost like he was dying again from the aneurysm, or at least feeling that pain over and over again. And for her, she never helped him. Because she just didn't know how to, and never did. And, for Cassie, it's like, while she's helping Melinda in her respective situation, which I'll also get to soon enough, the fact is that she feels like, I couldn't do nothing back then, but I can now. I think that's why Cassie pushes herself so hard, because it's like, I had the opportunity to help people back then, but, obviously her mom had her way of dealing with things, and that ended up kind of making her mom spiral, and it ultimately led to her mom not helping people. But it's like, no, I'm gonna do things different. Like, I don't want to embrace this gift, but I have to. I can't just sit by. And I'm curious, was that, because it looks like that's one of her biggest regrets, but it's like, up to what point did she finally give in and it's like, no, I'm a help? Like, maybe we'll kind of eventually get like a flashback to kind of see the first instance of that, like, Tom and Brian's early days of it. I mean, it seemed like Tom knew about it because of her mom, so it might be a situation of like, what their relationship was like with her mom beforehand. Did she work on cases with Tom back then, or was it just different? So, like, what were the circumstances like? I'm curious, will we kind of get answers about that or not? I feel like that's something they haven't really talked about, but maybe they have and I'm just not remembering. But nevertheless, her friend Melinda, her fiance died 2 years ago in a car accident, and she's like, I got this feeling she's still around, she's got something to say to me. When Cassie goes to check things out, it seems that basically Jenna is caught in, as Cassie kind of defines it as like, what was the exact wording she used? A death echo. Essentially, it's kind of like she's stuck in the moment of her death over and over again, kind of reliving it, and even Cassie standing in front of her reliving. Also, I wonder which, I'm sure Cassie, neither one is preferable, but I'm sure in her mind it's probably a lot preferable to be the one viewing, because obviously some of her visions is kind of like, it's from the outside perspective. She gets her own perspective on it. Other times she takes on the form of the victim, like obviously the whole situation at the end when Lila is drowning what could have potentially been like the newly couple, Ashley's wife and everything. Like, she was drowning her and everything, and Cassie took her place. Like, is that instance, like, even getting her face cut up, yes, it's all in her head, but still it's that borderline of like, kind of, you have to kind of jerk yourself awake, because it's like almost like having a living night terror in a certain extent. But it's like, I'm sure having a third perspective to that is preferable than being kind of like it happening to you, because I'm sure like she feels it, you know? So she definitely feels it, you know? But nevertheless, she actually talks to Brian, and Brian kind of suggests that maybe it's like, you know, what it all stems from the ring, because when Cassie touched the ring initially, that's when the vision happened. And so basically that ring symbolized their love, but now it's more of an anchor, because, you know, eventually she explains it to Melinda that basically Melinda wants to be with, you know, Jenna so much that she's kind of putting that energy out there in the universe, and it's kind of drawing Jenna's spirit in, but Jenna can never be with her. So it's just kind of like that car crash over and over again is almost like a symbolism of her trying to make it back to Melinda, but crashing and burning, can never quite reach her, you know? And, you know, you have Cassie being like, you kind of have to let her go. Like, one of you has to walk away, and Jenna can't, so it has to be you. And for Melinda, it's just letting go is the hardest thing. You know, you want to have that opportunity to just say that, knowing that maybe, hey, she has something to say to me, you know, it keeps her alive in my heart. And it's just kind of like hard to let that person go when you've lost him like that. You never got to say all that you wanted to say. They were literally on the phone trying to make up for the argument they have. She's like, I don't even remember what it was about. You know, it's always sad when it's that thing of like, when it's just the petty and small stuff that ends up not mattering in the end, you know? And that probably guilt kind of weighs on her. It's like, oh, because I didn't say I love you. She had something important to say to me. And I'm sure that's all it was. It was probably just, I love you. You know, it probably wasn't some grand mystery or something like crazy. It's like probably just saying like, let's put our bullshit aside. I love you. That's all that matters. And, you know, Melinda finally takes the ring off and everything, and Cassie's like, how do we know it's going to work? Melinda says, and like Cassie's like, we'll check it out and see, and if it doesn't work, then I'm gonna keep trying and trying until something does. You know, having Melinda's back, and she goes out there. And it doesn't happen, so it seems like Jenna's really ready to let go. Obviously, there's a whole subplot also about, like, Brian. It's like, his condition. This is the second time we've seen an instance of him forgetting. Like, I'm assuming, like, maybe some early, you know, I would assume, I would assume something neurological, but I'm also, like, maybe early onset, like, Alzheimer's or dementia type of situation. You know, Cassie kind of breaking down a little bit, being like, I don't know what I would do, you know, if something happened to you, so I need you to, you know, check out for my sake. Obviously, he's like, doctors make the worst patients, but obviously for her, it's like, I need you to, you know, be checked out. I need you to be okay. She's like, I know it's selfish, but especially dealing with this whole thing of, like, you know, losing someone you love so suddenly, it's like, you're trying to say like you're okay, you're pretending like you remember these things that I'm telling you forgot, but you're lying, trying to pretend like everything's okay. So I'm interested to see where that goes, but at the end of it all, Melinda, you feel her. She even says it. She's like, I feel like Jenna's free, you know, and that's what she's happy about. And, you know, obviously and I guess almost kind of universe works out, because it's like, yes, she helped Melinda with her situation, but Melinda's back in her life, and it can rekindle that, you know, that friendship that they had. And so maybe that's it. It kind of, because, you know, we don't know much about Cassie's personal life, because all she does is go to work and then she comes back home. That's about, and helps, you know, Tom and Damien with their investigations, but that's about it. She doesn't do anything else. So we don't know how much of a personal life she actually has. Does she like party and interact with other people? So having Melinda in her life might make her kind of rejoin the world, because she probably does still keep people at a distance just because of like her all the craziness that is, you know, this supernatural side of her life. Obviously, she doesn't want to involve a lot of people. Like I said, 'cause even at this point, Melinda's like the first person we've seen from a personal life. To be fair, that's from years ago when she was in school, but still, like, we've never really met her and even seen her kind of party or kind of, you know, it doesn't. I don't know whether that's just not who Cassie is, or it's been there the entire time. Like, oh, she doesn't have much of like a personal life outside of all of this, you know? So maybe Melinda can fill that role of being like, hey, I'm here for you, having someone you can rely on, talk to about all of this, you know? It's not, you know, obviously she has Tom and everything, but that's still kind of connected. It's like, it's nice to kind of have your break away from everything, to have someone, you know, someone outside of all of this, I think, outside of your family, you know, to have, like I said, friends. So it's going to be interesting to see where that goes. But I do like that Jenna pops up at the end to say thank you, you know? It's like, yeah, Melinda told me years ago about the whole situation of like, oh yeah, she knew a girl who could see ghosts and terrible things. I was like, I always thought that sucked. And, you know, Cassie's like, it normally does, but on moments like this, it doesn't, you know, moments where Jenna's like, yeah, let me see one more sunset before I go, and don't tell Melinda, because for her, it's like, it's probably the best thing, because it's like, obviously, Melinda finally let go. She's ready to kind of live her life again and not be held down by, you know, this memory of me. If we say like anything else of like, oh, like I came to visit you, she's still gonna be holding on, being like, even knowing that it's, hey, this is her, she's going fine, but it's like, give her, she has peace of mind now. All we're gonna do is retrench a lot of that, kind of undo all that if we let her know. So I just thought that was kind of a beautiful ending to it. So, but I'm very interested to see, you know, what the next episode has in store for us with all of this. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.